Okay, guys, good afternoon. Welcome back. It's Monday, March 22nd, and we just have about 2 minutes until the class time starts. So for now, hope you guys had a great weekend and ready to get in just a few more lessons before we head away to spring break. Hi, Ashley. Hey there, Nick. Chelsea. Hello, everyone. Hey, Danny. Hi, Noah, Hannah, Emily, Danny. How's it going? Hi, Yvonne, Edward, Mick, Nancy. Always good to see you guys. Springtime now, so I always prefer the warmer weather seasons, so it's kind of a nice change. Light too. Hi, John, Vanessa, Alexa, Diego, and Ray, Amanda, Micah. Hope you're all doing well. Hi, Nayeli. Okay, guys, well, let's go ahead and get started. It's pretty much 1 p.m. now, so as usual, welcome back. Good to see you all. Let me just begin with a couple of brief questions about some notes that I sent over weekend through Titanium. Have you guys noticed that I posted the instructions for the second homework assignment? I think I sent that off on Friday morning. I extended the due date just a little bit until Friday of this week, so you have just basically the whole work week to do it. Just if you can confirm that, that'd be the first thing I wanted to check in on, that you have received those little instructions and stuff about the second homework assignment. Okay, great. Thanks, Nick, for letting me know. Perfect. So just let's all be sure that we understand that that homework assignment is out there. And what it is this. Let me look at the, so if you go to your book, 5th edition textbook pages, okay? See, this is the 4th edition, which I sometimes keep with me because it's got a binding, and I've been too lazy to put the binding on the 5th edition. But for the page numbers anyway, for your second homework assignment. This is all inside of the email, too, that I sent to you guys through Titanium, so you can always go back there to double check on that and look at it again. But while we're here together in the live chat, in the live stream, just know that it's page 159 and 160 in chapter 5, and it's exercise 5-3. So you basically just have to complete that exercise from the textbook and send it back to me as an email attachment anytime before midnight at the end of the day Friday. So you have, the full rest of this work week, and that's what it is. It's a set of examples of arguments, and it's letters A through Z. So that's the 26 letters of the alphabet. Each one is a different problem in the problem set. Basically, you just have to write down the name of the fallacy of relevance that occurs in each example. And the fallacies of relevance were the ones that we were studying last time, except for red herring that I'm going to open today with. But I also sent some notes about red herring in the same email message, so that would at least help you get started if you didn't have any knowledge about red herring. So the 8 different fallacies of relevance are these specifically. We have the personal attack, aka ad hominem, appeal to force, which is also known as scare tactics, appeal to pity, some call it appeal to emotion, but we're going with appeal to pity, popular appeal, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, straw man, and then the 8th one is red herring. So the answer for these different 26 problems is one of those 8 words, but there are a couple of examples in the problem set where there is no fallacy. Okay, so for the most part, with a few exceptions, it's the name of one of those 8 fallacies of relevance. But then in a few cases where there's no logical error or a mistake in the argument, or if it's just a reasonable argument toward the conclusion, then the answer for those cases would be called no fallacy. So basically there's 9 optional responses for each individual question. You have the 8 names of the fallacies of relevance that I just listed, plus the other option of no fallacy. Okay, and so all you have to do to complete this homework is simply send me your assignment where you just list the names of the 26 different examples by name. You don't have to write the whole argument out this time. You just have to tell me the name of the fallacy that occurs there. So like, for example, you could say like letter A, and then give the answer, which is your attempt to say which one of the 8 different fallacies of relevance it is, unless it's no fallacy. Okay, so just trying to make sure that's very clear to you guys. If there's anything that didn't come through there and that you didn't understand, just let me know by way of email or any time during the class. But that is your second homework. It has to do with these fallacies. It's due Friday, anytime before midnight. Originally listed in the syllabus, it was scheduled to be due Wednesday by class time. I just extended that due date a little bit because we needed a little more additional time to finish the discussion of red herring on last Wednesday. So since I didn't get it finished on Wednesday, I'm giving you a little more time. Okay, so hopefully that's all clear, guys. Just the class keeps moving along. The other thing is I also have now finished grading the midterm. Danny, good question. Okay, so for anyone that's using the 4th edition, the number of the exercise is the same. It's still exercise 5-3, but in the 4th edition textbook, it's not page 159 and 60. In the 4th edition textbook, okay, Danny, it's page 151 and 152. Okay, so 151 and 2. Chelsea, it's both. It kind of spans across the bottom half of 151 and on into 152. So there you go, Danny, and thanks, Chelsea, for the assist. But that's right. So for 4th edition textbook owners, you'll find the exercise 5-3 on page 151 and 2. If you have the 5th edition, the current edition, it'll be 159 and 60. Slight difference of pagination. Okay, good. Thanks, guys. Okay, so with that all in place, I'm just going to quickly review some of the fallacies that we talked about on Wednesday last time from the fallacies of relevance category. And then we'll continue by finishing off the topic of red herring. And then we will get to those unwarranted assumption fallacies today. And we can kind of take our time because we also have our whole meeting on Wednesday that's dedicated to just finalizing these fallacies and reviewing them. So if there's any of the different terms or topics that we don't get into today, we have plenty of time to finish it on Wednesday, and then we head off to the spring break. I was also just saying, I think before Danny's question, I've finished grading the midterms also over the weekend, so I took some time this weekend to finish with those. I think I just now sent an announcement just as class started because I was working through office hours to finish those. But anyway, they're done. So any student that's looking for their grade on the midterm, please just email me, and whenever you're ready, I will send a reply back to you. But you do have to give me just a few days of maximum. Sometimes it takes a little while because I have so many other classes too, and I like to send informative responses that are personalized. So it just takes a little bit of time, but not to worry. If you hang in there, you'll certainly get something back from me as an answer within the 48 hours or so. So anyways, we're moving ahead through the class. We're done with the grading of the midterm. You can check on your score for that or for the other assignments if you haven't already. And your second homework is due this Friday. When we come back after spring break, it wasn't really my intent, but that's just the way the schedule fell with the dates of the spring break. There's a quiz. The quiz is devoted to the Chapter 5 material on fallacies. So when we come back on that Monday, I believe it's, I forget the exact date. Is it Monday, April 5th? I think that's correct. But when we come back, no, not the 5th, the 12th, because next week is the, no, I'm getting it wrong. Next week's the 29th, and then it's the 5th. So anyway, guys, yeah, when we come back on the 5th of April, Monday, whatever date that is, that'll be a day of the second quiz in the class. So we'll get prepared for that. I'll send you guys some review notes as we head into the end of the spring break. And I'll also have the second homework graded well before that. Okay, guys, so just a couple of updates on the schedule. Nothing has changed. It's all still as you see it printed in the original syllabus document, but just so that we're here and we can check in and make sure we're all clear. Okay, so last few things, I want to review these fallacies of relevance, and then we can move on to the next batch from there. So with fallacies of relevance, the category overall, there are 8 fallacies that fall into this category, and what groups them together is that they're all fallacies where the problem of the argument is that the premises do not have the right type of relevance to the conclusion. So the premises, which are the evidence in the argument, When it's a fallacy of relevance, the problem is that this evidence is irrelevant or it's unrelated to the claim that it's supposed to support. And that's why we call them fallacies of relevance. So within this category, we have a few different items. First of all, personal attack, aka ad hominem. What is the personal attack fallacy? So that's when the person, instead of replying to someone's argument and giving a rational counter argument, they just make a personal attack on the individual who presented the argument. So like if somebody tried to make the case for you as to why carbon emissions are causing greenhouse gases to pollute the planet and heat up, and therefore we should change those practices or moderate them, and someone says, oh, okay, well, you definitely don't know what you're talking about because, I mean, you know, you have a terrible outfit on and your breath smells, so don't tell me nothing about global warming, buddy. Come on, get out of here. Obviously, if that's the way that you reply to the person's argument, you're not even taking their argument seriously, and you're not even trying to give a rational response. Instead, you make it personal, you attack them. But that's no way to reply. That doesn't show that they're wrong. That doesn't dispute their evidence, and it doesn't deny the relevance between their evidence and their conclusions. So this is not the way to argue. It's sad that a lot of people do this. I guess people don't like being wrong, and sometimes instead of just engaging with their opponent's point of view, they make it personal and attack them. So we got to try not to do that ourselves. Don't take the bait if other people do it to you. The best thing to do if someone makes a personal attack in the discussion of argument is to point it out and say, you know, that is a personal attack, and don't you have a better argument than that, or are you just going to stand here and commit fallacies, right? Okay, so another fallacy of relevance is the appeal to force. Some call it the scare tactic. That's when instead of trying to win the argument by reason and appeal to logic and evidence, you just threaten the person with force, or you actually use it directly. So like if a person's talking to their boss about their views on, I don't know, government spending, and they think that the government actually should spend more to support, you know, important social programs, and the boss says, you know what, I totally disagree with you, and I would stop saying that around here. You know, if you want to hold on to your job, you know what I'm talking about. Like, I don't like people working here who have those kind of views. If that's the way that the boss responds, they're not really trying to show why the argument is false. They don't try and give counter evidence to the person's reasoning. Instead, they basically imply a threat to their employment status if they don't back away from their view. So that's what scare tactic is. You use or threaten to use force to get someone to back down or change their mind to your position. It's not a good way to argue. It doesn't show anybody that you actually have the reasoning behind what you're saying. Instead, you're just trying to use leverage, force, or intimidation to bully people and get your way, and that's not rational. Okay, there's next appeal to pity. Appeal to pity is when you invoke pity in an argument, but it's not relevant to the conclusion or claim. Like getting pulled over and saying, I'm sorry, officer, please, can you just not give me the speeding ticket? I know I was going 30 miles over the limit, but my mind has been consumed with sad thoughts all morning because I've watched a bunch of really sad documentaries over the weekend on war zones and refugees, and it's been tough for me to even sort of grapple with those thoughts as I drive. So, you know, please show me some pity. When the person makes a case that you should change your mind or treat them differently because of a feeling of pity or sympathy, then it has to be very important, and it can't just be something trivial or insignificant like that. Popular appeal. That's when you appeal to popular opinion to support your conclusion in an argument. But again, it's not relevant to the claim. Like saying God has to exist because most people believe in him. Or the Nike Air Force One is the world's best shoe because it's one of the most popular shoes that's ever been made. Or, you know, just saying that McDonald's, best food on the planet because have you seen how many people they've served? Literally billions. So, I mean, that's a lot of people. Very popular food, must be the best, highest quality food. Anyway, there's a lot more to making an argument for something than just pointing out how many people think it's cool or popular or whether it's in the majority. You actually have to make a reasonable argument based on facts and evidence towards the conclusion that something's good, right, or true. You can't just say it's popular. Sometimes popular things deserve to be popular because they're good. But in that case, you should be able to make an independent argument as to the quality or value of the thing. Okay, then there is appeal to ignorance. Appeal to ignorance, that's when you claim that something's true just because no one's been able yet to prove that it's false. Like if I told you right now that definitively aliens exist because no one's been able to show that they don't, so they must be out there. That's not really proof though. For proof of something, you need evidence that it does in fact exist, not just the absence of contrary evidence. I can't say to somebody, you must have stolen my bike, because you cannot prove that you didn't steal it and then just sold it to somebody. I would need to have better evidence than just the absence of contradicting evidence to make that case. Okay, hasty generalization. That's when a person jumps to a universal conclusion based on evidence that's not sufficiently large, or that is biased or unrepresentative. Like a person says that they had a couple of bad experiences with a member of the opposite sex, perhaps, and then they just generalize to the conclusion that all men or all women, whatever, are that way. I don't know. I guess anytime you jump to a conclusion too quickly and it's a sweeping general claim that says all of a certain thing have a certain feature, that would be a hasty generalization. I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of other cases. We've used a bunch of them so far in the last meeting. A person might say, well, I had a couple of friends that went to Cal State Fullerton and didn't graduate, so it just must be the hardest school for anyone to go to because of those couple of cases. Well, a couple of anecdotal examples might not be enough to make a general claim about the conditions for all students. So anyway, hasty generalization. Then we have got straw man. Okay, now I think we ended with straw man last time, so this is getting close to the last part of the review of last meeting. Straw man is a fallacy that happens when you misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem even easier to refute. So like if a person makes a reasonable sounding argument and then you paraphrase it afterwards and basically misstate what they really said so that it sounds worse. Like if a person said, I think that police should have some of their budgets rebalanced because perhaps we spend too much on a hyper-militarized police force, and we might want to shift some of those resources to mental health experts and others who can take some of the burdens off of police work that sometimes end up in violent encounters with the public. So don't you think that's sound policy? Just, shift some of the funding that we give to police to militarize their police departments and, fund public health and mental health experts to help support their job. Now imagine someone hears that and this is their response. Oh, so what you're saying is to eliminate the police force. So literally just have no cops anywhere. What are we going to do then? If your house is getting robbed, you're going to call a cowboy and come save your life or something? So obviously your argument's ridiculous and extreme, so I reject it. But look, the person didn't say eliminate the whole police force. They said, shift some of the budgetary priorities and fund other things that will help support their work. So when it's mischaracterized as fundamentally eliminate law enforcement, then you could argue that that's a straw man. A straw man where we're attacking not the real view, but this overblown version of what the person really said so that it sounds completely wrong. A person maybe says that we should legalize marijuana because unlike other drugs that are Schedule I classified by the federal government, it doesn't have the same addictive potential and so on and so forth. And then someone might say, oh, okay, so you're a person telling me that let's legalize every drug. That's crazy, that's insane. Do you really want to have, a pilot of an airplane smoking crack when they're about to take you on a flight? Your argument's ridiculous. But the person didn't say all that stuff about all the other drugs, let's suppose, in one example of an exchange. Okay, so just a few more thoughts on the straw man. Now, red herring. Did any of you guys maybe by chance get a chance to look at the notes that I sent on the weekend? So I sent some notes about red herring because I felt a little badly that I didn't get to cover it in the meeting last time. And so here, let me just sort of summarize what I wrote. Red herring is one more fallacy of relevance. So it's the 8th and final one. And with the red herring, what basically you do is you try and distract from the main topic of the discussion or the argument. So this is when you sidetrack the argument by bringing up a different unrelated issue. So you kind of go off on an unrelated tangent. Okay, red herring. Sidetracking an argument by bringing up a different unrelated topic. So let's see. Suppose that someone's trying to just make a point in an argument or in a discussion, and in reply, the other person basically just shifts the whole topic of discussion out from underneath them. So like if somebody says, we have such a big drug problem in this country, opioid abuse is a real epidemic problem. We have record numbers of people that are using prescription opiates to self-medicate, and in many cases these people are becoming addicts, and it's incurring significant medical and mental health costs. So we should do something about the problem of opioid addiction in the United States. What do you say? Now imagine their opponent comes back and says, no way, that is not a problem, because have you looked at terrorism? That's the real issue. Terrorism is a bigger problem than that, so there's no problems with opioid addiction. Well, what's wrong with that response? It doesn't really counter the person's position or point of view. It just says, hey, here's something else that's also a problem. But does that make the case that there's no issues with opioid addiction? No. It just tries to shift the subject of discussion to something else. Another case, this happens in politics all the time. Like one person might say to their opponent in a debate, well, where are you at on protecting the environment? Our country is one of the big polluters, and the globe is heating up. So don't you think we have an obligation to conserve and to make better use of our energy sources? And the opponent might come back and say, oh, well, but I'm sorry, didn't you have like a scandal in your marriage? Didn't your wife or husband cheat on you last year? And so I don't need somebody telling me what to do about the environment who can't even keep their marriage together. Now, look, that's a red herring, isn't it? It's also kind of a personal attack. So I don't know, I'm kind of blurring lines a little bit. But if I didn't make it personal, then it would be a clearer case of red herring. But you understand, right? By replying in that way, you're not even disputing the person's claim or their evidence. Instead, you're just trying to change the topic to something else. Here are some examples from the book that I thought were also kind of interesting. Someone says, drinking and driving is really, really bad for you, and it's dangerous. If you drink and drive, you get behind the wheel, you could lose control of the vehicle, cause an accident. At a minimum, you could get into legal problems, and even worse, you might cause harm to yourself or other people. So why don't you stop? Imagine the person's coming back with this argument. Don't tell me there's a problem with drinking and driving. Come on, look around you. Do you see how many people text and drive, or they're on their cell phone calling people all the time? So why is it a big deal that I drink and drive? Is that a good response? No. It does not establish that it's not unsafe to drink and drive. It doesn't show that drinking and driving is okay or that there's no problem with it. It just says, hey, here's something else that people do while they drive that is also dangerous. And is that really a way of refuting the original position? No. It's, again, changing the topic. I could go on and on with this. I'll just throw one more. Someone says, the United States, we have a huge prison population, and maybe we have incarceration rates that disproportionately affect less fortunate individuals and minorities. So maybe we should revisit the way that we enforce some of our laws to make improvement on mass incarceration. And then somebody says, oh, come on, don't tell me that we have a problem with mass incarceration. Look, if you lived in a place like North Korea, you probably wouldn't even get a trial. They'd just throw you in a dungeon or a torture chamber, and that'd be the end of you. So do you really think that our legal system has such a problem? There are other places where they'll cut your hands off and all that stuff if you even just do something small. Is this a really good reply, though? No, because it doesn't justify whatever problems are perceived within our own legal system and criminal justice system by pointing out the fact that there are other places where there's even worse problems. That'd be like if someone slapped you and you said, what are you doing? They'd be like, come on. Some people will just stab you right there. So there's no problem with me slapping you. It's obviously okay. It's not okay. It's a red herring to try and change the topic to something else. Okay, so when people do this, you have to redirect them to the topic that was originally being discussed. When they try and throw you off of the track and say, but what about this? This whole kind of whataboutism thing. You have to say, no, that is a red herring. What about my argument, though? What do you think about that? Or do you agree or do you disagree? If you don't agree, what's the reason that it's incorrect? Now, why do they call this fallacy red herring? That's a little bit of an interesting backstory. So in hunting, sometimes if you're a hunter, you want to have these hunting dogs that you bring along with you that help you retrieve the animal that you've shot in the field or in the woods, right? So say you're shooting at a pheasant and it's like 400 yards away. You got a good shot, so you took it out, and now you need this dog to go and track it down, bring it back to you. So you get a bloodhound or something to do that. But one thing that sometimes is done to help train these dogs to make them more skilled at the retrieval of the fallen prey is to try and distract them with these little tricks. So herrings, what are they literally? They're these little fish, and a red herring is a very smelly little fish. So they have a powerful, pungent, fishy smell. What you would do with them, if you want to use them as a way of training hunting dogs, is you place these herrings literally on tangents, diagonal and away from the direct course forward of where the fallen prey is. And what you're trying to do is to see when this dog is being directed towards retrieving the, let's say, pheasant that you shot that's down there, will the dog be distracted by the powerful scent of these herrings that you've strategically placed, and that will cause it to deviate from its original target and to get bogged down following the scent of these herrings? Sometimes in the beginning, when they're not perfectly trained, they'll follow the herring. They'll get distracted by the herring, and now they're going off on that tangent. But when they're very well trained and they're good hunting dogs, then they won't be distracted at all by these herrings, and they know to stay focused on the original target. This is a metaphor, okay? Because within an argument, we could call it a target, which is the topic of debate or discussion, right? And when a person drops a red herring, in the logic sense, what they're doing is it's not literally a fish, but it's a separate topic that they're trying to get you to stop focusing on the original one and to zoom over to that one. It's, skip to something different. So just like these skilled hunting dogs, you have to be the kind of person who says, that's a red herring, and no, let's stay focused on our original topic of conversation. We've got time. We can get to that later. So if we have another topic, we can debate it, but one thing at a time. Okay? And you'd be surprised how often people try and defeat an argument by using the red herring fallacy. So we won't be fooled by that now that we know, now that we have that concept added to our knowledge. Yeah, and they give examples of others in the book, like Angelo says, hey, I don't think Mike should have lied to his girlfriend about what he was doing last night. That was wrong. And his friend says, oh, I don't know about that. If I was in his situation, I probably would have done the same thing. But here, the second guy is changing the topic from what the other person should have done to what he would have done. In doing so, he has changed the issue from a moral one to a factual one. And then they talk about detainee treatment at U.S. facilities abroad where we had people in custody by the U.S. military, and says, oh, the bullying and humiliation of detainees by U.S. soldiers in Iraq is a stain on our country's honor and reputation. But let's remember that there's a big difference between this and the sort of things that the dictator of Iraq used to do, Saddam Hussein, where there would be mass tortures, mass murders, and mass graves. So in this case, they've switched the focus of conversation to what the United States should do and what its legal and moral obligations are, to how other countries are deficient in their obligations. And that's another case of red herring. Okay, guys, so with that, I hope that we're all clear and we finished with the last fallacy of relevance. So now you have all the information that you would want or need to complete that homework that's due Friday, that I mentioned earlier in the meeting. But we continue. So there's one more grouping of fallacies to add to our full list. So we covered all the fallacies of ambiguity last week on Monday. That was equivocation, amphibole, accent, division, and composition, 5 of those. Now we finished the 8 fallacies of relevance. Personal attack, scare tactic, popular appeal, appeal to pity, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, straw man, red herring. Now we have a new group, and this is the last one, and there's 7 in this category. So these are what are called fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And that's the plan to get through these now. Hey, Peachy. Okay. Fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Peachy says hi. Good girl. Okay, let me just put her down. Yeah, so fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Let's first of all try to understand the general idea of what the category is. So what are the fallacies of unwarranted assumption overall? Well, there's 7 items grouped in this category have this common element, that they're all arguments which include some assumptions that are not supported by evidence. Okay, so arguments which contain assumptions that are not supported by evidence. Okay, so that's what fallacies of unwarranted assumption are. Unwarranted means unjustified. So these are fallacies of unjustified assumptions. Baseless assumptions are built into these arguments. Assumptions that are, again, not backed by evidence or proof. So we're going to learn that there are 7 different members of this family of fallacies. And that's what I guess I'll list now. So if that's on your notes, hopefully it is, I'm going to clear the board. And what we'll now do is just show the name of the 7 members of this category. Okay, so let's list them out. Just I'll create the header again. So here's what they are. Yeah, fallacies, unwarranted assumption. Okay, so here we go. These are the names. We have begging the question. Okay, the second one we'll learn is inappropriate appeal to authority. Okay, inappropriate appeal to authority. Then there's loaded question. Okay, loaded question. False dilemma. False dilemma. Okay, so false dilemma is the 4th one there. 5th, questionable cause. Okay, questionable cause. Then 2 more. Slippery slope. Always an interesting fallacy there. Slippery slope. And then last but not least is the naturalistic fallacy. Okay, natural, first part of the word, and then istic, naturalistic fallacy. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so there you see the names of our 7 different concepts to learn about today. And again, they are all falling under the big umbrella of fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So here are the 7. Begging the question, inappropriate appeal to authority, loaded question, false dilemma, questionable cause, slippery slope, and then the naturalistic fallacy. So as before, we'll start up here at the top with number 1, begging the question. Go through the definitions and examples one by one, and just try to make sure that that's all clear in your mind. Okay, so having listed the names, we're going to focus on this one at a time. Begging the question first. Okay. So begging the question fallacy, here's how this one goes, just so that we can focus on it. Devote our attention completely to this definition and concept. So what is begging the question fallacy? Here's the begging the question fallacy. In this kind of fallacy, the problem is that one of the premises of the argument is just a reworded version of the conclusion itself. Okay, so when one of the premises in the argument is just simply a reworded version. So it's just the same thing, but with slightly different words. Reworded version of the conclusion. Okay, so that is begging the question fallacy. So there's a couple of examples that are seen here in the book. let me just try and use some of those and work with what they've given, and then we'll develop it even more. So suppose that this argument here is just simply stated with one premise, and then the conclusion below. And suppose that the argument just has this premise, which says, well, I'll list the conclusion first. So suppose that the conclusion of the argument is that it is immoral. Capital punishment is wrong. Okay, capital punishment is wrong. That's the conclusion of the argument. So that's what's being attempted to prove. And suppose, you're asking, well, what is the full argument? What is the evidence or the reason behind that? And someone says this to you. Well, I'll tell you why capital punishment is wrong. It's wrong because it is immoral for the state to inflict death as a punishment. So just look at this argument here. Tell me if you can spot how this argument begs the question. In other words, how is this premise equivalent to the conclusion? So the conclusion claims that capital punishment is wrong, but why? What reason is given as to why capital punishment is wrong? The reason given, as you can see, is that it says, because it is immoral for the state to impose death as a penalty. But what is it, in other words, when the state imposes death as a penalty? What is another piece of terminology for the state, the government, imposing death on someone as a penalty for what they have done? We can also refer to this equally with what phrase? So that's my question right now, as we're discussing the begging the question fallacy. Capital punishment is wrong, okay. Well, what is it when the state imposes death as a penalty? It is capital punishment, Harry, that's right. It's just the same thing by another name. So some call it the death penalty, some call it capital punishment. We could be even more verbose and say when the state, imposes death on a citizen as punishment or penalty for a crime. So what this says is that capital punishment is wrong. Why? Because capital punishment is immoral. But what is it when something's immoral? Immoral is just a synonym. It's just another equivalent term for saying that something's wrong. So if you really inspect the argument a little more carefully, what you see is this. It's going in a circle. It says capital punishment is wrong. Why? Because capital punishment is wrong. But that's not giving any kind of reason. That's just repeating the conclusion itself as the evidence. And obviously, when you have evidence for something, the evidence cannot be the same thing as what you're trying to prove. Like if I tell you, this man is guilty, and someone says, well, what's the proof? You say, because he's not innocent. Don't you understand that that would not be making an argument? I mean, it'd be an argument, I guess, technically, because you get a premise, but the premise is the same thing as the conclusion. So for a conclusion to be legitimately justified, it has to be based on other information. It can't be based on itself. So sometimes people call begging the question the fallacy of circular argument, and that is because the argument does kind of go in a circle. The conclusion is equal to the premise, and the premise is equal to the conclusion. So like this thing is justified by itself, and we cannot have information justified by the information itself. It has to be justified by other facts that are available. So that would be one example of a begging the question fallacy. And so just to make sure it really sinks in, I want to kind of give you some other examples that are along the same kind of lines. All right. Okay, so what if I was making an argument about sports? And I'm talking football with somebody, and I tell somebody, here's a fact. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're the best team in football. They are the best team in football. And someone says to me, okay, well, interesting opinion. What is your argument based on? Why do you think they're the best team? What if I say this as my reasoning? Okay, you want the argument? Here it is. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the best team in basketball in football, thank you. They're the best team in football because no other team is as good as they are. So that's why they're the best. Now, what is wrong with that argument? To say that no other team is as good is logically equivalent to saying that Tampa Bay is the best. So I haven't really given any reason except for just saying they're the best because they're the best. They're the best because they're better than everybody. But that's not saying anything different from just repeating the claim that they're the best. Now, could a person give an argument for either of these conclusions? Yes, a person could give a reasonable argument that they're the best. But you'd have to give reasons that are not just repeating that they're the best. So you might say they're the best because they just won the Super Bowl, because they have this Hall of Famer quarterback, Tom Brady, because they've got, Gronkowski, and he's like such a successful pairing with Tom Brady. You could say, oh, they run the best offense, or you could make all kinds of reasons that would establish your conclusion. But you can't just say they're the best because they are, because they are, because they are. You're just repeating yourself, and that's begging the question. Begging the question, like the question still remains, why, though, are they the best? You can't just say why by repeating the claim itself. Okay? Does this make sense to you guys? Just let me know. Hopefully it's sinking in and it's coming through decently well. Let me think of more examples. How about this? Someone says their argument is that abortion is wrong. And you're like, why though? Question, why is it wrong? What's the argument? And they say, well, I'll tell you, the reason is because to deliberately end a pregnancy is not right. It is not right. To deliberately, I don't know, like maybe we could even say terminate a fetus. Now, here's the argument, as you can see. It says abortion's wrong based on this claim, based on the evidence that it's not right to deliberately terminate a fetus. But what is it to say that something's not right? It's the same thing as saying that it is wrong. So if something's wrong, it's not right. What is abortion? Well, to be precise, it's to intentionally terminate a fetus, right? It's to like have a pregnancy and to end the pregnancy on purpose with the death of the fetus. But that's not saying something different. It says it's wrong because it's wrong. Now, are there arguments that are reasonable arguments that it's wrong? Sure. Just like there are reasonable arguments that capital punishment is wrong. You could say capital punishment is wrong because it does not have a deterrent effect. Or you could say it's wrong because, let's see, it perhaps doesn't show the proper value of human life. Or you could say that it's not, in the utilitarian sense, beneficial to society because it imposes a lot of court costs on us through the appeals process. You could say all kinds of things that are not just repeating that it's wrong. And the same with abortion. You could say it's wrong because the fetus is a person from the moment of conception and a person has the right to life. We could make arguments. There are such arguments, but this is not a good one. It just says it's wrong because it's wrong, and that's circular. Okay. One more example, and I'm just taking this from the book. Then we can move to the next in our list. This one's interesting, mentioned in the book. So here's what it says. Okay. So suppose I have this argument with two premises, and the first premise says, well, the conclusion of the argument, let's start there, is the conclusion that God exists. Now, one is like, okay, if that's your conclusion, what are the reasons? What's the evidence that backs that? What are the premises? Now, suppose that somebody says, well, God wrote the Bible. And then the second premise, the Bible says God exists. So therefore, God exists. Now, looking at this argument here, which of you can tell me which premise here already assumes that this conclusion is true? So one of those two premises above already assumes the truth of the conclusion before we get to the conclusion. So which one of those two statements there is already like built into it is the assumption that God is real? Let me know. Yeah, that's right, Danny, the first one. Because what does the first one say? It says that who wrote the Bible? says that God wrote the Bible. But of course, to write something, you have to exist. So, you couldn't possibly be a non-existent being if you wrote something. So the first premise says God wrote the Bible. That already presupposes that the conclusion is true before we got to the conclusion. So again, it's begging the question. It assumes the conclusion in a premise. And the premises can't assume that the conclusion is true, or else there'd be no need to even give these premises. Okay, and that's what it says in the book. Here, the conclusion God must exist is already assumed to be true in the premise that the Bible is the Word of God. So, are there good arguments that God exists? Yes. I don't want you to think that it's a bad argument because of the conclusion. It's a bad argument because the evidence is not independent from the conclusion. But there are fine arguments that God exists. Sometimes I have to teach those in other philosophy classes. Like there's the cosmological argument, the design argument, the ontological argument, and that's just a couple. And they all make reasonable points, right? The cosmological argument says that since the universe exists and there has to be a cause for everything, then there has to be a cause for the universe. But whatever causes the universe cannot be a part of it, since then it would already have had to exist to cause itself. So something other than the universe must cause it. But whatever that other thing is can't be something that depends on anything else. Otherwise, it would lead to an infinite sequence of causes. And therefore, there must be a first being, a first cause, which is not contingent, and that would be the creator. But anyway, I'm just giving you a case of how there can be reasonable arguments for the existence of God, but the one here is a question-begging argument, so it's circular. Okay, so in any way, the question-begging fallacy is sometimes frustrating if you don't recognize it at first, or if it's not immediately obvious which premise or premises assume the conclusion. So if you think an argument contains this fallacy, write it out in standard form and see if you can swap out a conclusion for one of the premises and it still mean the same thing. If so, then it's definitely circular. Okay. All right, so we've gone through one, begging the question. Now we can erase and go on to the next, which is the inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy. So the next fallacy of unwarranted assumption for us is this one. Inappropriate appeal to authority. Okay, guys, so inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy. Now, when you have an expert who's giving testimony on something that they know a lot about, it can be appropriate to use that person's testimony as support for a conclusion, or as premises for a conclusion, yes. But we commit a fallacy when we look to someone as an authority in a field that they're not an expert in. Okay, so this fallacy is committed when we look to an authority in a field, but that person's not actually an expert or an authority on that topic. Okay, so we appeal to the opinion or view of an authority. I'm putting that in scare quotes because it's like a false authority. We appeal to the opinion of an authority to gain support for our claim or conclusion. But, and here's the problem, but this person, whoever they are, is not an authority or expert. On the subject. So it's like citing the wrong kind of authority. It's citing a person who doesn't really have special expertise, authoritative knowledge, or standing to have some kind of opinion that you can use as evidence. So say, for example, little kids will sometimes do this. They learn something at school, like in their biology class, their teacher teaches them about evolution. And then they come back and they say, oh, but, that can't be true because my dad, who's just a plumber or whatever, he says there's no such thing. Now, no disrespect to anyone's dad or the profession of plumbing itself, of course. But that doesn't give you the kind of knowledge or expertise that you might need to have some kind of authoritative opinion on this topic, right? So a person's being cited out of their depth of experience, and that's not therefore relevant to the conclusion that it's false. So when you cite someone's opinion or view, it's better when the person actually has some kind of authoritative expertise or knowledge in that subject area. Otherwise, it's an inappropriate appeal to authority. And they give such an example in the book. It says, "My priest says genetic engineering is not safe. Therefore, all experimentation in this field should be stopped." Well, unless your priest is an expert in genetic engineering, before accepting his argument as correct, you should ask him for reliable and authoritative evidence for his assertion. So people do this all the time. They say, well, here's one expert, and I'm citing him, but he's not an expert on the right topic. Like sometimes a person will say, well, my governor or my senator said something that is contrary to science. And so isn't that information that I should rely on because it comes from this political figure? But a politician who's not a scientific expert isn't the kind of person whose experience or view you should be citing in a scientific debate. So if you have a guy that's like, governor of Florida or something, and they say the masks don't work or they're not effective, why would you use that person's opinion when it contradicts what we hear out of the CDC and career infectious disease specialists? So it's not a good argument, and it's not valid or credible to cite a person's opinion who's not an authority on a topic, and that goes across the board. Sometimes titles like doctor or professor or officer, senator, congressperson, sometimes these things can mislead you into thinking that because they're an expert in one field, they're an expert in everything. But like if you go to home today and you say, I was listening to a lecture today, and one of my professors, Dr. Vulich, he said that helium is one of the heaviest chemicals, and so that must be true. Well, the problem is I'm not a chemist. Actually, it was my worst subject going back to my days in school. In high school, I got a D on chemistry, and I was very bad at it. So it just never stuck with me. I don't know. Maybe it's rationalization now to say that. But anyway, I'm not the chemistry person per se. I'm pretty knowledgeable about a lot of things. If you want to know about philosophy, logic, critical thinking, the history of Western thought, I know much about that, and I am an expert. But if you're talking to me about many subjects where I have no knowledge at all, then I'm not an expert. And so saying, oh, well, he's a doctor, and so we've got to take his view as credible and authoritative. It depends on the field of study and expertise. So just know that. Someone might say, oh, well, my music teacher said that there's no such thing as climate change. A music teacher is someone that you should defer to if you want to know things about the scales, the modes, the intervals of music, technique, and proper playing, but not somebody who perhaps you'd defer to in a scientific debate. Okay, so sometimes children look to their parents when the parents don't have specific expertise in some field. Sometimes it also happens in marketing and advertising. So we've talked about popular appeal, and a sort of cousin of that is inappropriate appeal to authority when it comes to advertising. So like if you see Michael Phelps doing all these advertisements for milk and stuff, is this person a medical or scientific expert or a dietary expert? He actually does some of these ads now. Talking about Michael Phelps, he's doing these like mental health ads where it's like, do you need a psychiatrist and you need someone to help talk to you about your problems? I'm Michael Phelps, and let me just show you these different websites and services that are great. Well, I would probably rather hear it from an actual clinical psychologist or someone in that field than an Olympic swimmer. If I wanted to know a lot about proper swimming technique, I'm sure there's no one better you could ever talk to than Michael Phelps. But he's not the first person who I would have thought of if I was, trying to find out information on, clinical psychology or mental wellness. And so anyways, that's something to keep in mind. Here's what it says in the book on that point. It says, we often find this fallacy in advertisements in which celebrities are used to promote products. For example, Lady Gaga doing a holiday ad from Barnes & Noble, NBA All-Star player Blake Griffin doing a car ad for Kia, Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps doing ads for milk. In none of these cases are the celebrities authorities on the products they're endorsing, and yet people accept their words simply because they are experts in unrelated fields. Uniforms and distinguished titles such as doctor, professor, president, lieutenant also serve to reinforce the mistaken perception that people who are experts in one field must be knowledgeable in others. To avoid inappropriate appeal to authority, make sure to check an expert's credentials in the field before using their testimony as a piece of evidence. There's this famous physicist, Michio Kaku, I believe is his name, and he's well known in the field of theoretical physics. And he did a commercial not long ago, a couple years back, for this investment app that you can get on your phone, right, to help you make wise stock choices and all of that. And the whole marketing tagline was, be smart, be smart with your investments. And they were just trying to draw on the association with him because he's, smart, because he's this like super intense physicist that knows all stuff about quantum physics. But again, if I was looking to someone to give me advice on how to manage my investment portfolio, then I would probably want to talk to like, a financial specialist and a financial planner. And I wouldn't necessarily use the viewpoint of a master physicist as my starting point of argument. Okay. So anyway, guys, there you go. Inappropriate appeal to authority. And I hope that makes decent sense to you as well. So we can go on, and we're just going to keep moving. Got plenty of time, so there's no rush. Next one is the loaded question fallacy. Okay. So the third member of the unwarranted assumption fallacy clan is loaded question fallacy. Not to be confused with begging the question or questionable cause. This word question, I guess, appears in multiple fallacy names, but they're just each distinct, and this is the loaded question. So how does it go? Loaded question is a fallacy that has to do with the asking of questions that assume information that you just don't know. So this fallacy is committed when you ask a question, but in the question, there's an assumption about an answer to a different question that you didn't ask. Okay, so let me put it this way. When you ask a question, that assumes an answer to a different unasked question. Okay? So you ask a question and it assumes an answer to a different question that you didn't ask. Okay, so loaded questions, questions that assume too much. Like, it could be something as simple as this. Suppose you're talking to someone or someone's talking to you and you guys just don't know each other like that too well, but the person says to you, who are you dating right now? Now, how's that a loaded question? Who are you dating? What's the assumption built into the question? You can let me know in the chat to make sure that you can follow me here. So if somebody asks the person that, who are you dating? How's that a loaded question? I think you know. Yeah, it assumes that you're dating somebody, right? And the only question then is, well, who is the person? But perhaps this is an individual who's not in a relationship or dating anyone, right? And in that case, you can't answer the question in a straightforward way, like giving a name. Instead, you'd have to say, well, actually, that's a loaded question, and it assumes that I'm dating someone, but I'm not. So I have to correct the question itself instead of giving a direct answer to it, How about, I can keep going with these. Someone asks you point blank, what's your major? What's your major in college? How could that be a loaded question? We'll run a few of these off real quick because I think it'll be pretty clear enough. But with your help, we'll get these examples out. So someone says, what's your major? What's the loaded assumption there? Well, first of all, that you're even going to college, I guess that's good, Margarito. But even if you're going to college, you might be one of those students that's undeclared, right? So I guess in a way, my own question was double loaded. It was like assuming you're a college student and that you have a major, but you might not be doing either one. Even if I knew for a fact, though, that you were like a college student, it could still be a loaded question if I was not aware of your degree goals, right? Like you may have not yet assigned yourself a major, and that's normal in a lot of cases as you start college. Sometimes people now have talked a lot about assuming a person's gender, right? So like what if someone says, I don't know, like your name is, I guess, gender ambiguous a little bit, like someone's name is, what's one of those types of names? I'm trying to think of one, Shannon or something. Shannon could be a male or female name, and there's like, oh, so they're talking to you online. It's like, are you a guy or a girl? He or her, Alex. There you go, Margarito, Alex. Are you a he or a she? Now, of course, some people today don't identify by either of those given pronouns. So you could say, oh, well, that's a loaded question. You're assuming that I have to be one of those two. I could be they. I could be, every other type of possibility under the sun. Or if somebody says to someone like about their orientation, so tell me, are you straight or are you gay? You could say, well, that's not the only two possibilities, since we have all these other possible, bisexual or asexual or whatever the case may be. Maybe another case could be that someone's asking a question pertaining to your political affiliation. So someone says to you, I don't know, who did you vote for in the last election? That's a loaded question because maybe you didn't vote. And maybe if they ask you who did you support, that could be a loaded question because you might not have supported either one, or you might have supported a third party candidate. So in all these different ways, a person can ask a question which assumes too much, which assumes things that are not known to the asker of the question. Sometimes, in a courtroom or in a official setting where you're dealing with an officer of the law or a lawyer, you can imagine loaded questions being given to try and induce a response that's not in the best interest of the person being interrogated. So imagine an interrogation or a cross-examination happening in trial, and the person has pleaded innocent to a crime, but the prosecuting attorney thinks they're guilty, so they say this kind of provocatively while they have them on the witness stand. Sir or ma'am, whatever, look, just tell us all today, for the first time, why did you kill him? Why did you do it? Just come clean and tell us why you did it. Now, how's that a loaded question? Well, it's asking about motive, which assumes the person did it, and the only real question is why did they do it? But if you have denied the crime itself, then you can't give a motive because presumably you didn't do it. So in that case, again, you have to say, I'm sorry, sir, or whoever, but I can't answer the question because I'm telling you I did not commit the crime. So that question assumes that I did. You're being pulled over. This one ever happened to you? Cop says, so I just have a question. Do you know how fast you were speeding? Now, maybe if you think that his radar gun was off or he was, ticketing you illegitimately, then you couldn't just say how fast you were speeding because you denied that you were in the first place. So it could be a loaded question, even though in most cases I'm sure they would have the facts at hand and they would know. Okay, the book has some out there examples. The first one they give is, have you stopped beating your girlfriend? I mean, come on, that's a loaded question, I guess, assuming that the person is not abusive towards the partner. Have you stopped? The question makes it sound like, I assume you have been, and so the only question is, have you stopped or not? I guess a more easy example than that could be something like this. What if I say to you, so what's your preference when it comes to drinking alcohol? Like, what kind of drink do you like the most? Now, if you don't drink at all, then you can't answer that question and say, oh, okay, I like kind of beer, or I like wine, or I like cocktails. If you don't drink, then you can't answer the question about preferences when it comes to drinking. This happened in real life one time. I saw this happen. So when I was a little kid, we would sometimes play at one of our friends' house, and their mom came down one day to like serve cookies or something to all the kids that were chilling. And this one new kid that was like in the house hanging out with our friend saw the mom and like just looked at her, and he asked this question. He says, oh, when are you going to have that? When are you going to have a baby? Because he thought she was pregnant. She wasn't pregnant at all. It was just her body, body type. So how bad the loaded question was that? When is the baby due? There's no pregnancy happening. So the person had to be corrected. Like, I'm sorry, but you're assuming I am pregnant. I am not pregnant. So there's no baby coming. There's no due date. So anyway, sometimes you just got to be careful with the way you ask questions. Make sure you don't ask questions where you're, sticking your neck out, making assumptions that you're not perfectly well clear on. And in other cases, when people are asking loaded questions to you, just be willing and prepared to gently correct them and guide them towards the right information. And that's what it says in the book. This fallacy is sometimes used in the court of law when the lawyer demands yes or no answer to a question like, have you stopped beating your girlfriend? However, this question makes the unwarranted assumption that you've already answered yes to the question of whether you've ever done that. Here's another loaded question example from the book, and then after that we'll move on. How about this? Someone asks you, do you think that the death penalty should only be for people that are older than 18? Now, what is assumed in that question that perhaps assumes too much? If someone asks you, hey, do you think it should be just for people 18 and up or no? How's that a loaded question? What's being assumed when a person asks, do you think that the minimum age eligibility for death penalties should be 18? What's being assumed? Should it just be for people that are 18 and over, or for everybody? Well, that's the question, but we assume that the person agrees with it in the first place, right, Margarito? And you do have many people, including Governor Gavin Newsom here in California, that have philosophical opposition to the death penalty. Even President Joe Biden, since he's a Catholic, and there's a general rule against usage of the death penalty in some Catholic traditions of Christianity. So there's, anyway, I'm just making the point that there are some people that do legitimately find it wrong to use death penalty at all. And so if you're talking to that kind of person, then the question, do you think it should be reserved just for 18 and older, would be a loaded question, because it assumes the person feels that it should be allowed for anybody in any case. Okay, cool. So good, both Margarito and Hannah. We can then move on from that loaded question. Hey, can't believe I misspelled this thing. Can you guys please forgive me? I'm really not bad at spelling. I don't know what happened here, but the word loaded, L-O-A-D-E-D. I hate making errors, especially in notes, but it's nice when I can catch it, so then you don't go away thinking this man does not know how to spell the word loaded question. You see there in the chat. Okay, thanks. Okay, guys, so with that, hopefully everything's clear. Oh, one last one. I don't know why, but it just popped up in my head. Because this sometimes happens in relationships. So have you ever had this type of situation in a relationship? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, or you've heard of someone experience this. But the question gets raised by one of the partners. You know, what's wrong? What's wrong? Just that simple question could be a loaded question. How? How could that be a loaded question? If someone simply asks you out of the blue, hey, what's wrong? What's loaded about that? Or potentially loaded. I'm not saying people shouldn't check on each other and see how we're doing. That's a great thing. But in some cases anyway, maybe this is a little funny, but that could be a loaded question. Why? To ask, assuming that something's wrong, right, Margarito? And if nothing's wrong at all, it's like, what are you supposed to say then? Come up with something that you think could be wrong? You'd have to instead just say, I'm sorry, maybe it seems like something's wrong, but actually there's no issue, everything's fine, so don't worry about it. But sometimes people think something's wrong and that you're just holding it back and you just won't tell them. So I don't know. Anyways, guys, just something to think about there. So we can continue to move on. Next is false dilemma. Okay. Okay, false dilemma. I've also heard it referred to by a few other names. Some call it the fallacy of false choice. I've also maybe heard it called as the fallacy of false dichotomy. But anyway, we'll stick with dilemma since that's what's given in our book. And a false dilemma fallacy is this. It's when you have a complex issue, but the person basically oversimplifies the responses that you could have to it to a simple either or, to a binary either or choice. So that's what it is. Let me write it and then I'll explain. So one reduces the responses to a complex issue to a binary, meaning just two options, binary either or choice. And that there is the false dilemma. Okay. So what if somebody asks or says this to you? I know that you're either hardcore right-wing extremist or hardcore left-wing socialist. Which one is it? Which one of those two, do you subscribe to? Total socialism or right-wing nationalism? Just which one is it? And how is that a false dilemma? It's making it seem that there's only these two options, but are there more than those two? If so, let me know what's another possibility, either in between or different from hard left and hard right. False dilemma. More than two options, but it's being simplified down to just two. Reduced and oversimplified to just two. So what are some possibilities in between like far extreme left, far extreme right? Question for you, just let me know. Or you're like, wow, I never thought of that. I thought there only were the two. No, there's more than that. There's moderate, sure. There's moderate in the middle. Like if a person says, what political party are you affiliated with? Is it a Republican or Democrat? You can say, well, there's other parties. There's third parties. There's some people that decline to state. Me, for example, I am declined to state. I've been unaffiliated with either political party ever since I was like 18. But, you know, I vote in every election. Nonetheless, if I was trying to be boxed into one of the two political parties or whatever, I would have to say it's a false dilemma because there are more options than that. There are more possibilities than that. What if somebody says, yeah, so like limits options. For example, if you aren't one, then you're the other. True, Brenda, like take it or leave it, you're either with me or against me, that kind of stuff. That's false dilemma thinking. Here's another example, which the book mentions too. Suppose that someone says, America, love it or leave it. You know, so which one is your position? Love it or leave it? What would be your view? Now, isn't that a false dilemma? There are more possible options than loving it or leaving it. What's another choice? What probably you can and should do in a nice liberal democracy where we have the freedom to dissent, that is having criticisms and staying right there where you're at to have those criticisms addressed and hopefully improved upon. So it's not just love it or leave it. You can have a feeling of ambivalence towards some things that you want to improve. So how about just complain and stay right there? That's different from loving it, and it's also different from leaving it. We shouldn't have to go anywhere in a free society where we're able to raise the complaints that we raise and hopefully get those things turned into policy changes. So love it or leave it is another false dilemma, certainly more than those two extreme opposed options. What if someone is thinking in this all or nothing way about the way that people view them? Like, oh, this person, I'm interested in them, but I don't know. I can't tell if they love me or if they hate me. You know, which one is it? Do they love me or do they just think I'm terrible? Well, isn't that a little bit all or nothing in the way the person is thinking? It's a false dilemma. It doesn't have to be that they love you or they, you know, hate you. What if they just are like meh, like, you know, just kind of whatever. I don't really have passionate feelings of love or dislike. I'm just kind of neutral on this. So by looking at it in this false dilemma way, the person misunderstands the reality of the possible perspectives others could have. And that might also make them feel a certain type of way. You know, if they don't show that they love you and you're like, oh, well, now I'm paranoid that they hate me. No, they might not just be thinking too much either way. Sometimes with polls that we take and surveys that we take, depending on how they are worded, the poll itself can commit this fallacy. Like suppose that it doesn't offer you enough options to actually reflect the true state of opinion. And that's mentioned here in the book where it says this: how options are presented in the questioning can influence the responses given. For example, in one survey, people were asked whether they thought that the courts were too harsh or not harsh enough with criminals. Only two options. When they were given only those two options, 6% said too harsh, 78% said not harsh enough. But when a third alternative was given, don't have enough information about the courts to say, 30% chose that middle ground option. And then only 60% chose not harshly enough. So what's the real distribution of public opinion on this? You don't get to see the full measure of it when the questions in the survey are being presented through a false dilemma. So be careful as you study and observe the results of some polling data to note the possibility of this kind of error. Sometimes also it can work together with body image and mental wellness issues that people might have to cause them to think irrationally about themselves. Like take the case of a person who has an eating disorder. They're trapped in this kind of false dilemma thinking that they're either emaciated, rail thin, or they're just hideously overweight, and they can't see the possibility of a healthy middle ground in between those two polarized extremes. So don't get bogged down and caught into all or nothing thinking. And when people ask you questions or pose, inquiry to you, don't allow them to put you into this false dilemma box. If you feel like they're doing that, then say, I'm sorry, if neither option is satisfactory, it's best to say, I'm not quite sure, or maybe you should reconsider the options that you're presenting with, okay? So watch out for either or questions that try to put you on the spot and force you into an answer that you think there's actually more subtlety or nuance concerning that, okay? All right, so that's false dilemma, and I think that we've had a good discussion of it. So 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 more of these fallacies of no, sorry, make sure I'm getting it right. 1, 2. Oh, yeah, no, it is just 3 because overall, let's see, how many did we do? We did begging the question, inappropriate appeal to authority, loaded question, false dilemma. Okay, good. So there are 3 more, and these are the last 3 that we'll cover on Wednesday at the next class. There's going to be questionable cause, slippery slope, and then the naturalistic fallacy. So in between now and Wednesday, I would challenge some of you guys to try and think of a few examples of fallacies on your own that kind of fit into these different categories. And then maybe if I have some time, we'll probably have some extra time, we can check on some of the examples that students give. And then we'll also test the other students if they can identify the example by name. Now, Dylan, you asked, will these be on the homework? No, not the current homework. There is going to be a 3rd homework that I'll assign after the break, and that is going to have to do with finding examples of fallacies in media and advertising. So then all these will be fair play. But for the homework, the only fallacies that are used are the ones that I mentioned at the beginning today and also in the announcement through Titanium. So fallacies of relevance is what the homework is all about exclusively. And that's just the fallacies that we mentioned in the last meeting. So appeal to force, personal attack, popular appeal, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, straw man, red herring. I don't know if I named them all, but anyway, there's 8 of them in the fallacies of relevance category, and those are the ones that are eligible for the homework. But these fallacies of unwarranted assumption, they're going to be used on the quiz that happens after we return from spring break and also on homework too. So it's important to know them all, even though not necessarily for this homework. Stacy, will I post the home? Yes, I did post it, Stacy. So that's what I started off at the beginning today saying, and many students have confirmed that they received it. So just go back and check your announcements. Check the announcements tab of Titanium. You'll see it there. But just as a repeat, while we're here together, tell me, Stacy, do you use the 5th or the 4th edition? Are you using the current 5th edition, or did you happen to use the 4th one? Because there are different page numbers depending on which edition. The page numbers listed in the Titanium announcement refer to the 5th edition because that's the official textbook, and that's page 159 and 160. If you're using the 4th edition, it's page 151 and 152. But in either case, it's exercise 5-3. So it's in chapter 5, exercise 5-3. And it's on those pages. Okay, good, thank you. All right, everyone, so unless there's any other questions for today, I guess I'll let you guys go. Thanks again for being here and for all your hard work so far. And let me know whenever you want. I can get you your midterm grade. Other than that, do try to finish up your 2nd homework and make sure to send it to me before the end of the day on Friday. So it's due anytime before midnight on Friday evening. Okay, then. Perfect. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good day, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.